drumming is just more than paradiddles. It's kind of how you arrange your thinking so that you can have success, whatever that is, because it all starts with a thought. And if you don't have the right thinking and then have the corresponding action to turn those thoughts into something, you have nothing. You're just going to be always on the outside looking in.
Welcome to Making It with Terry Woolman, the show that explores the secrets, successes, and strategies for making it in the music biz. And now, here's your host, Terry Woolman.
Well, good morning and welcome to the show. And thank you for tuning in. I want to let you know how much I appreciate you joining us on our show every week. If you missed our last interview, you can hear it and all of our episodes at entertalkradio.com/makingit or download our app and take us with you. So often I get asked questions about the creative process, so I created this show to focus on what it takes to have a lasting career in the ever-changing landscape of the music business. You're really in for a treat as I've invited my friends, some of the best and brightest in music, to share their stories on how they have influenced the music that has shaped our lives. I guarantee you're going to love it. So let's get started. My guest today is David Garibaldi. Born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area, David began playing drums in elementary school at the age of 10. At age 17, he began his professional career and in 1966 joined the United States Air Force, where he became a member of the 724th USAF band stationed in Tacoma, Washington. Upon leaving the military in 1969, he returned to the Bay Area and on July 23, 1970, joined the legendary Tower of Power. It was in this setting that David became one of the most influential drummers of his generation and became known as an innovator in funk drumming. In addition to his impressive career as a session drummer, educator, and clinician, David is once again performing and recording with the Tower of Power. In 1998, after an 18-year break, he rejoined the group for some unfinished business. Please welcome my guest today, David Garibaldi. Hi, David.
Good morning. How's it going, everybody?
I'm really happy to have you on the show. And before we get into starting with your growing up in Northern California, I want to say, first of all, thank you for your military service.
Thank you.
And also, secondly, I want to wish you a belated happy birthday.
Thanks. Yeah, it was pretty epic. We had a pretty good time. I was in Seattle. Seems like I'm always on the road, on my birthday, sometimes in Europe. Actually, we've been in Europe a lot of times on my birthday. This time was Seattle, a little closer to home. So it was pretty fun.
What did you do to celebrate? Was it you and the band, or did you have family there?
I mean, I was on the Million Gig March, like I always am.
Right.
we were playing in Seattle at the Jazz Alley. So it was great. We had a good time.
Perfect. And when I say did you celebrate with your family? Yes, you did, because, Tower of Power is your family.
Of sorts. That's exactly correct. So I got home yesterday. We had, the little family celebration here at my house. And then, but on the road with the Roving Men's Club.
The Million Gig March.
Yeah.
Before we get too far into our conversation, I just want to say that a lot of people, myself included, are so grateful to see you back on your feet after your accident. And without putting the complete focus of this interview on that subject, may I ask how you're feeling and how your recovery is going?
I'm good. Good. Certainly good enough to to be back to work and with our schedule, which is pretty crazy. So, but I don't know if I'll ever be 100%. The accident was pretty traumatic. So to come back from something like that, takes a lot of effort, at least to the degree that, that I was hurt. So yeah, I'm working on it. I'm into fitness. That's, kind of one of my passions aside from drumming, so I stay as fit as I can. And, it's like an athlete, man. You just prepare for life, living good is hard work,
Right. And, I can relate to that because I've always as well been physically active. And I know that that's all, being healthy physically and strong has been a part of your life for forever, and and I actually had a bike accident many years ago with a spinal injury, and I understand the recovery process is a lifelong endeavor, and it's also, becomes part of your workout. It's just, it shifts, yes. what how you approach working out. You now incorporate all the physical therapy and things that you need to do. So I get that. And sure. I'm glad you, welcome back. Thank you. You had a lot of people praying for you.
Well, I think that I'm pretty sure that's why I'm here talking to you, is for that reason. I mean, I meet people everywhere who said, we're praying for you. We're so glad to see you, blah, blah. It just makes me feel great, that people were concerned, and, prayer works. That's all I got to say. Here I am.
Right. It sure does. It absolutely does. I reached out to our mutual friend, drummer Herman Matthews, just to see if he had any kind of insight or words about you, since he's one of the drummers that has filled in for you in the band. And he basically just said that your shoes are huge to fill, and that when he first heard Love to Do It, he was absolutely hooked, on your drumming.
Oh, so. Nice. Herman's cool. He's good people, he's fantastic.
I love him too. Yeah, he is. And there's, there's a really strong tribe, of, drummers and percussionists that I've always admired and appreciated, that's pretty unique in the music industry, where other guitar players and piano players, et cetera, kind of stay in their own lane and don't share information as willingly. There's such an openness and I can't think of any better word than say tribe of wonderful.
It's kind of true. Drummers, maybe it's because drums are, central to so many cultures, that it's sort of this communal thing that happens, Yeah. And, you're absolutely right. I mean, drummers get together. I've participated in drum festivals all over the world that are literally, attended by, hundreds, if not thousands of people sometimes at these events. And people are just crazy about drums. They love talking about drums, other drummers. I mean, when I get together with other drummers, what do you think we're talking about? Drums.
Right.
I mean, it's really amazing, and, because it has such an interesting tradition. It's a very rich history. There's so much to it, and I don't know. I love hearing and seeing what people do with their art, and for some reason, drums is one of those things. Man, it just gets people talking, gets people moving. It's cool.
Well, I mean, it is the original instrument, second to voice. Back in the dinosaur days, people would vocalize and then they would start hitting a log, with a stick. I mean,
well, they're still doing it.
Right. And still doing it.
Nothing's changed.
Exactly. Right. The sticks are a little smaller. Let's talk about your early life growing up in Oakland and San Francisco. Take me back to Pleasanton Elementary School and your early years. What was your family life like? Was it a musical family? Were you encouraged to be a musician? Were you an athlete back then?
Well, it was a great place to grow up. I was born in Oakland. I grew up in Pleasanton, which was just over the hill from Oakland, out in the Pleasanton Livermore Valley. So it's, it's Bay Area still. I'm about 30 minutes from Oakland. And when I was growing up, it was like a kind of a rural sort of a community, very small little community. Everybody knew each other. A lot of immigrant families. My father's family, they came from Italy. My mother's family came from Portugal, and they were, farmers and that kind of stuff. That was how we grew up, in a very agricultural, sort of a vibe, and very family oriented. Lots of good food, lots of love, lots of really great, my memories. My brother and I even talk about this all, it comes up often, how we remember so vividly and fondly our childhood, because it was just always, I'm just surrounded by people laughing all the time and together and loving each other. It was really cool, and so that's kind of continued through my life, is that sort of vibe. And music, there was always music playing at my house. My mother played the piano, and my aunts, they would sing, and I had another aunt that played the piano. So, they'd be together and they'd be singing songs, and, it was just fun, And so when I started playing, I wanted to originally be a trumpet player. I love the trumpet still today. And I wanted to be a trumpet player. So the school band director comes around the classroom and, asks who wants to play. Of course, I raised my hand. When it got to me, what do you want to play? I want to be a trumpet player. I want to play the trumpet. Well, son, we have no trumpets left. A violin. So I tried the violin, and of course, no offense to anybody, of course it sucked. And so I, stopped for a couple of years. I think I was 8 at the time. And then for some reason, at 10 years old, I decided that I wanted to play the drums. My mother had been playing this record at our house called the Saber Dance, and it had all of this percussion stuff in it. It was very percussive. And so I started playing the drums. I asked the band director, could I play, and they put me in the band, and kind of started that way and just kept it going, kind of like that.
Did you have a private teacher as well then, or basically your early training was right there in school?
Well, it started with elementary school and then through high school. And then my father, at the suggestion of my band director, band teacher, said, well, why don't you get him some private lessons? And so I did the private lessons and wasn't very good at it. And so,
in which way?
I wasn't. I didn't really care about practicing. It wasn't fun. The work part of it wasn't fun yet, and so I didn't understand the value of that. And so that lasted a little while. And the teacher, who was actually a pretty reputable guy here in the area, he taught at a university, and wrote books and played with the symphony and all this other stuff. He told my dad, why don't we just stop the lessons? He's never going to be very good. And so my dad, I remember driving home from that, and my dad never said anything. That wasn't, I don't believe that was I don't think that was his belief, So they just kept encouraging me. I kept playing, because it was fun, and it was, then when I was 17, I started playing professionally, and that's when I started to get kind of excited about stuff and realized that, wow, I can make money doing this,
Right.
And then, of course, military and all that,
There's something so wonderful about the story that you just said, because that could have been a game changer with a teacher kind of shutting you down, but your dad still keeping his heart and open and his enthusiasm high, for not letting you, not making it an issue, where so many other parents would have just taken it at face value and stopped encouraging you to pursue it.
Yeah, he was, my parents were just really great about that. Very supportive, and encouraged us to do what we wanted to do. And he didn't look at it as a failure. It was just, okay, something that didn't work. I was 17. When you're 17, many of your brain cells are not working.
Right.
And so, it was just one of those things that happened, and it's all good.
Do you think some of the family life and just the simplicity and joyfulness that was in your household and community had to do with growing up in the 50s?
Probably. Our community here was very small.
Mm-hmm.
When I graduated high school, I think there was only 150 kids, in the graduating class, and so my parents grew up in this valley. Their parents came from Europe and settled here. So, a tradition of that sort of thing. A lot of my friends were like that. Their grandparents or even their parents came from another country. So it was just cool. It's a different way to grow up, a different life. So I remember the first time I went to Italy to visit. My first trip to Italy, and it was crazy, but it just felt so familiar because of the way that I grew up, the smells, the way the people were. All the older ladies looked like my grandmother. It was, It was really something, so that was kind of like my cultural experience, growing up. I'm very thankful for that. It was cool.
Right. Did you speak Italian in your house as well?
Well,
or Portuguese?
We heard Italian and Portuguese every day, but they discouraged us from speaking the language. They wouldn't teach us the language because culturally that was just their thing. They
Right.
didn't. They wanted us to be American kids, and they didn't want us to have any sort of discriminatory, vibe coming our way. So they wanted us to be American kids, but we got all of the cultural things from that. It was heard those languages every day. My father spoke every day. My mother, all her relatives are all around. All the people in town. There were even people in town that they communicated with like that. So
right.
Then when I got married, I married an Italian woman, and so I hear Italian every day in my house. My boy speaks Italian, and so I get along well enough to keep myself out of trouble and to know when they're talking shit about me.
Right. How old is your son now, by the way?
He's 13.
13.
Yeah. And then I have a daughter from a previous marriage. She lives in Los Angeles. She's in her 40s. So I do things a little differently around here.
But it's actually a great chapter and a great time in your life to have a 13-year-old son. I think that's pretty wonderful.
It's awesome. He's really smart. He plays basketball. He golfs. He does well in school. He's a wise ass. It's just fun. It's just good.
Right.
Good life. That's all I can say.
So David, let's talk about, when you first joined the Gotham City crime fighters that became the Motowns and then became Tower of Power. Is that inaccurate?
No, that's how it goes. So the Gotham City crime fighters, that was Emilio and Rocco and Jack Castillo, Mimi's brother, Jody Lopez. They were the Gotham City crime fighters. They grew up together in Fremont, California. And so that's here in the Bay Area, South Bay. And they began playing music together. I mean, Emilio is, like, we call him Mimi. He's the only guy that I know of all the musicians that I've ever met who started a band on the day that he started playing an instrument. I'm not kidding.
Remarkable. Yeah, I didn't know that.
And so him and Rocco, they've been playing together since they had instruments put in their hands.
Mm-hmm.
and that was their band. They started a band, and it's always been like that. So, it was the Gotham City Crime Fighters. It might have been something else, and then they became the Motowns. They added a couple horn players, and then when Doc joined the band, I think they had become at that point Tower of Power, or getting close to being that, and they were Tower of Power when I joined them already. So I replaced Jack, who was Mimi's brother.
Mm-hmm. And why do you actually remember the date, July 23rd, 1970? I found that kind of remarkable, the date that you joined Tower of Power.
It was a big deal for me, I guess.
Sure, yeah.
It was an exciting time. The band was really unique, still is. But
still is.
At that time, they had like a vibe. There was just something about them that was really interesting and different. They were playing all these cover songs, that really obscure cover songs. You only knew about them if you knew music. And then they were playing some original songs, and with horns and all that stuff. And it was much like music that I was listening to here in the Bay Area that was popular with, with all the kids and stuff, R&B music with horns and all that, and was on the radio. It was everywhere. It's in the air, And so, to be in something like that, I just felt like I was made for it. They had this record deal, and,
with Bill Graham, correct?
With Bill. Yeah. Bill's our first manager. And so, we were running around in our equipment in a van and all this other stuff. And I remember our first gigs, we were up in Lake Tahoe, here in California, California-Nevada border, Lake Tahoe. And we slept on the floor, and who gives a shit? I mean, it was just fun.
Exactly. Right.
Ignorance is bliss. And I mean,
it sure is.
It was such a good time, and it was such a rich experience, in just all ways, So, I don't know, man. It just lit me up. It's one of those things, man, where you get excited about something and it just changes the trajectory of your whole life, So, and I had written it on my calendar also. That's July 23rd, 1970. And
you're right.
It's just if you're going to have a cool birthday, that's a cool birthday.
It sure is.
I celebrate it just like I do my regular birthday or an anniversary,
Well, it's well worth celebrating because not many people have musicians, and including all the people that we know, have had the opportunity to be in a band for so many years. It's a real gift, certainly loaded emotionally, and not without its challenges, but just the very fact that you've been, you and Rocco have played together with so many years, it's like, it's just very special, and the level of intuition that you all have with each other can only come from having logged so many hours together, being in a van and sleeping on floors and, dragging your ass around the world together with your buddies and, just giving it up, just leaving it on the stage with every show that you do. You guys are always focused and high energy and it's always been that way with that band. So,
with Rocco, and unfortunately, he's not in the band anymore. We had to take him off the road because of his health, but
yes,
playing with him was really interesting. He was like the complete opposite of me in terms of, studiousness and all this other. I mean, I wanted to learn about what I was doing. I mean, I grew up sort of in the, the scholastic sort of tradition with playing and all that stuff, so I could read and, use that all the time, And Rocco, he could care less. I mean, he did. I'm serious. He knew absolutely nothing about music and wasn't interested. He made up his own technique. He could play with a drummer like nobody's business. I mean, he was like radar. I remember when we first started playing together, I used to make cassette recordings of, our rehearsals and stuff. And I was listening one day and I noticed that when I would play on my hi-hat, he'd play really short notes. But then when I'd go to the ride cymbal, he would play longer notes. I think, wow,
that's very unique.
Yeah. So I asked him, I said, Rocco, do you know you're doing this, man? I mean, and I explained to him what I was hearing. And he said, well, it just seems like that's what I should do. He said it like that. Now, isn't that what musicians go to college for and study all their life, to be able to relate to music in that way that, well, I do it because I make this move because it just seems like that's what I should do. It's, this intuitive, right, creative thing that's supposed to happen, right?
Which most people don't even begin to learn until after they leave college. That's
correct. And they associate that particular type of event, they associate that with having all of this knowledge. You have to have all this knowledge to have an experience like that. But that's not true, because that's the other component to playing music. That's the intuitive part. That's the creative part that you combine with your knowledge to turn it into something that's you. And so right. Rocco, he's just, he's finger painting, man. I mean, he's just creating his art, It's beautiful.
Well, that leads me to
that was really good.
Go ahead, David.
No, I was done.
It leads me to want to talk to you about another very large part of your life, which is being a clinician and an educator, and incorporating those very things that we're talking about right now. Because in college, I've always felt that what they do is they teach you about music, but you don't learn music. They're not teaching you music, they're teaching you about it. And then those of us who have learned to dive in deeper and unpeel the layers of music to get to exactly what you're talking about, to the subtle and so important act of listening, that skill set, to be able to make this incredibly subtle adjustment between the length of notes because you switch from hi-hat to ride. Yeah, I would imagine that's something that you now teach, and talk about when you do clinics around the world, because you understand the importance of that.
Well, just to start on that subject, I remember one time I did a clinic with a bunch of Yamaha clinicians, and it was Randy Brecker and Dave Samuels and, all these really, really fabulous players. It was in Santa Barbara, California, and we did this all-day event for high school kids. And all these, well, just not even high school, just young kids, just, young people. And we did clinic during the day. We talked to them. They were able to play with us. We'd have them come and sit in. We did a concert at night. And I remember in the afternoon, kind of as things were wrapping up, I think the thing was as if it was a question and answer deal. And so one person stood up and said if Randy was talking, and the person said to Randy, if there was one person or one thing that you could leave with us today that would be really important, what would that be? And so Randy kind of thought for a second, and he said, well, listen. And he said that listening is probably the most important musical skill that you can have, listening to one another. And really that makes a lot of sense, because if you want to interact with other people, just even on a conversational level, you have to be a good listener. The art of conversation is the listening part, right? Because then you have something to respond to, And
Absolutely.
so I thought that was really a brilliant observation about music, in that if you want to be a great musician, you want to really play well with each other, you want to have a really great team of people, then you have to listen. You have to listen to each other. And I think, as far as like with Tower, it's all about that. I mean, the star of our show is the music, not the people in it,
Right. Yes.
And so being a part of a band is all about listening. It's all about being part of a team, being part of a structure, and finding freedom within a structure. And the greatest musicians who we admire, they all understand that. They're all great listeners, or else they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. For as deeply and as for as long as they've been doing it, right? So those
true.
are the people that we admire, and they have that skill. It's so cool.
Back in 1980, you won. Actually, from 1980 to 1985, you won the R&B funk category in Modern Drummer magazine for 5 consecutive years, and then again, you were honored in 2003 with the same award. Did that change your life or your perception of yourself in any way? The first time you ended up in Modern Drummer.
I have to say, not really. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of looked at it as a really cool thing. And, for me, the story is still being written. There's still things going on. It's for others to say what my value to all this is. I'm just trying to make a contribution to be my best. It's really cool that happened. The one that, to me, that was the most significant of all those kind of things was in 2012. I was able to get into and I don't know how it happened, into the Percussive Art Society Hall of Fame. If there's a Hall of Fame, there's that one, because that's your peers vote you into that.
Right. That's fantastic.
And so I had gotten an email from the president of the PAS organization at the time, and I thought it was just like some kind of advertisement. I'm reading it. And it says, well, we want to, we've elected you into the Hall of Fame, the Percussive Art Society Hall of Fame. I said, what? So I wrote them back, and they explained. And I was blown away. These are like educators and other players,
right,
that respect your contribution to the art. And
right, these are your peers.
Yeah, and so for me, that was such a cool thing. It just kind of put some meaning onto all of the effort that I've put forth to that point. And because I've always admired, I wanted to be a player, but I also wanted to be a teacher. And so I remember that growing up, that was always of interest to me. I always was, the teachers that were like my favorites, they were like my favorite musicians too. I viewed them in the same way. Their ability to communicate and to teach you something, how to do something. Because I think that's what teaching is. It teaches you how to get where you want to go. My best teachers also are my mentors. My favorite teacher, who's still alive, Mr. Graves. He's always going to be Mr. Graves. His name is Gene Graves. He wants me to
Graves.
He wants me to call him Gene.
He does?
He does. And I cannot
Mr. Graves. Right.
I cannot call him Gene. And so there's 2 other drummer friends of mine who also studied with him, Ralph Humphrey and Rick Quintanilla. These were guys that grew up in the area here that studied with him. And sometimes they call him Gene, but I tell them I I can't do that. He's always going to be Mr. Graves to me. And he's even come to my house. He came when I got hurt. He came to visit me to see how I was doing and all this other stuff, right? And him and his wife and his lovely wife, Marilyn, and they're sitting in my kitchen, and I'm still calling him Mr. Graves. You know? So, but, you know, being a teacher, to me, is a really great teacher is like, you're like Elvin Jones, or you're like, you know, Tony Williams, or, you know, some of the great people who really impact the way that we play, you know, that made a stamp on the music that we play, you know. And a teacher, a great teacher, has a big part in that, helping people to find themselves, you know. It's cool.
Right. And not just musically, but also personally, emotionally, spiritually, and on every level, really learning who you are. You know, you were, I've read a few quotes and I grabbed a few of them. One is that, you said, we spent a lot of time searching in the 70s, striving to realize our goals as people and as musicians. There was lots of self-examination, and you learn that if you play enough music and work with enough people, if you experience enough life, you find out what's really important.
Oh, of course. Absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, I just came to the realization, you know, even in the last couple of years, you know, because I have students still, and, you know, that, and in my personal growth, that, you know, just drumming is just more than paradiddles, you know. It's kind of how you arrange your thinking so that you can have success, whatever that is, because it all starts with a thought. And if you don't have the right thinking and then have the corresponding action to turn those thoughts into something, you have nothing. You're just going to be always on the outside looking in.
That makes sense. You know, I feel like we're lucky that the era that we grew up in, where, you know, in the 70s, there was a deep yearning for self-understanding and realization. And, you know, those of us who survived it, you know, really got a great benefit, you know, from just looking inside, you know, and being accountable for who we are and wanting to know who we are, and understanding that it's deeper than just about ourselves. And, you know, all of those, you know, that seems to be a lost art, you know, that way of looking at life, you know. And it's interesting because, again, you know, your son Marco is 13, you know, he's not yet a millennial, but, you know, you get to look and see at his generation of, you know, what is important to them. And I'm wondering what, you know, what's your observation on that?
Well, you know, he's pretty focused. I mean, he kind of like has goals for himself already. I mean, he's very thoughtful, cares a lot about his friends. We took him to Lake Tahoe last year when Tower was playing up there. And so we're all in the hotel room together. You know, it's his first time really in that particular type of situation. He'd been to shows before, but, you know, to spend the weekend where I'm working and, you know, we're just hanging out. And so it's, you know, him and me and mama, you know. So I get up in the morning after, you know, the first night we're there. I get up in the morning and I got my computer open and I'm working on some music and I got my coffee and I'm just kind of sitting there. And so he walks by and he kind of looks at what I'm doing. And then he comes back again and he says, "So this is what you do?" Like that. I said, "Yeah, this is what I do. This is my routine. You know, on the road, I work on music all day. I practice, you know, and then do the shows at night. This is my work environment, you know." So he kind of shook his head, you know. And then a couple times after that, he asked me, just kind of really kind of the first time he said it kind of surprised me. He said, "How do you be successful?"
Great question.
You know, and I'm saying, gulp, choke, you know. And so I just, talked about what I do and how I do it. And, now that he's, playing basketball and he wants to be good and all this other stuff. And, it's important to kids to have something that they can do that they can be good at, because there's all this peer pressure and all this other stuff, Remember when he first started playing ball, he said, "They don't give me the ball." I said, "Well, dude, it's because you suck. You need to learn how to play."
Right.
And he took that seriously, and started working at it. I told him, you just work, man, and don't worry about the result. The process is what's important. You just practice and get better, and pretty soon they're going to be giving you the ball. And that's what happened.
Right. I love that he asked you that question, and and that you had the wherewithal to know that what the best gift that you could give him is the understanding of passion and focus and commitment and dedication and curiosity. All the things that have driven your career.
Well, they say that kids are like video cameras with legs. And so. They watch you. Not only do they hear you,
right,
but they watch you. And so if they see you living your life and you're working hard, you're trying to make something of yourself, that is, that speaks loudly to them, because it's, you're walking the talk in front of them,
Speaking of focus, I know that you, when you were studying, I believe it was with Murray Spivak, you made a decision that you were going to change your grip technique, and I'm wondering how you were able to balance your time working as a full-time musician while literally devoting yourself to continuing to study drums and, of course, altering your technique. How challenging was that for you?
Well, I learned how to do that sort of transition with a guy that I had studied with before that here in the Bay Area named Chuck Brown.
Mm-hmm.
And he taught me about the discipline of practice and was pretty hardcore, very old school with practice routines and everything was very black and white. There was no gray areas of stuff. You work hard, you get a good result. You don't work, nothing happens. And so he would always tell me that, show me things, and we'd start working on stuff. And he'd say, "Don't use this on the gig. It'll happen." And I've never had anybody tell me that before. And so I kept working, and sure enough, what I was studying overtook my bad habits. And pretty soon I started to have, good technique. I was able to play in a way I had never played before. I was able to express myself differently musically than I'd ever done before. And so when I started with Murray, I applied the same sort of thing. And that was his philosophy as well, is that, don't do this on the gig. It's just going to happen. And sure enough, it did. Pretty soon, all of those habits that I was the bad habits I was trying, developed, was trying to change. Pretty soon that the good things were there. I'm currently studying with Bruce Becker there in LA. And I'm just
smiling right now, David, because I love hearing you say I'm currently studying with, because I do the same. It's never ending for me as well. And it's such a pleasure to hear you say that as an extremely accomplished musician. It's just fantastic that you understand the value of continuing your growth. So I interrupted, but I was just, I don't often hear seasoned musicians say, I'm currently studying with.
Well, maybe it's a drummer thing, and
right. Yeah.
And maybe it's a trumpet player thing too. But, a lot of the people around me, my close friends, they study. The trumpet players, the trumpet players in our band, they're studying all the time. They're students of Bobby Shue, who lives in New Mexico now, the great Bobby Shue. And so a lot of my drum friends are practicers and studiers. And the great ones, the great drummers, are only great because they do that, because they practice and they study. There's no shortcuts to any of this stuff. All these guys are students of the instrument. And that's the only way that you grow and learn. That's what makes the drum thing so cool is I remember when I had problems, I was having problems with foot technique. So I called Steve Smith, who's known for many years. And I said, bro, I'm having problems with my foot. Can you help me? And he said, sure. So he sent me a bunch of videos that he made in his practice room. And then he says, why don't you come up and visit me? He lives in Ashland, Oregon. So I went up, I got a hotel, and I drove up there, and we spent the day, and it was just invaluable. Another time, I got a lesson with Dom Famularo, great drummer in New York, teacher. I went out there, I flew out there and got a hotel, and we worked all day. I mean, it was invaluable. Same thing with John Riley, the great jazz drummer, John Riley. I went to New York, got a lesson with him. It was 2 hours of the best time I could have spent. Those they just stay with me. There's awesome stuff. So whenever I have a problem, if I'm really wrestling with something, I just call somebody.
Right, which is such a proactive and positive way to go through life. Instead of feeling inadequate some way and putting a judgment on that, you are just observing it and looking at being solution oriented to erase that problem.
If you really look at what your current needs are musically, then it's real easy to figure out where to go and what to do.
Right.
And if you look at your playing as this huge mountain, the size of a mountain that you're at the base of the mountain, and you want to get to the top. If you only focus on the size of the mountain, you're screwed. But if you focus on moving up the mountain and those steps that you have to take to move up, pretty soon you're moving, man. You're closer to the top. So
it's a great, I like that way of looking at it.
Action is really important. It's the process. You just got to get moving. And if you look at what your current musical needs are, you'll always know where to go. Forget the rest. Right. There's going to be one thing that's going to pop up that you're having an issue with that will help you in your current musical situation. And then you get going, you get working.
Which leads, that's great advice. And thanks for sharing that. And this leads to my closing questions. We have about 8 minutes left in our conversation. The first is a 2-part question. Because the show is called Making It, what does making it mean to you, both personally and professionally? And also, can you share 3 tips for success that have driven your career?
Making it, I'm still trying to make it, I guess. I mean, I still look at it like that. I never look at myself as having arrived at anything. I'm just because I guess I have sort of a underlying, Italian insecurity. I don't know what it is, but, I'm always pushing myself to try to get to the next level, and I always want to be myself. always. That's kind of something that I've always admired about music and the drummers I admire, because, this is art, no more, no less. This is art.
Right.
And so the drummers that I admired when I was coming up, and even the drummers that I admire today still, are unique individuals that have their own sound, their own signature, their own way that they do things, their own way they practice, their own way they play. Their whole vibe is unique. And to me, that's what this is all about, is being yourself, finding your voice, and then developing it, turning it, becoming as eloquent at expressing yourself as possible. And you have this life to do it. And so if something that you're doing you're really interested in, then you pour gas on that fire. You get excited about something.
Absolutely.
Doing. And that excitement is what ignites, your life. And for me, that happened when I was 17 years old, that moment of ignition, if you want to call it that. And that got me excited about playing. And then there's been a few other things that have happened like that. But it has always inspired me to just work harder and look deeper and try to figure out how to do this better on a continual basis.
Right. As you said earlier in our conversation, the story's still being written.
Exactly. Yeah. Really.
David, at this point of your life, with everything that you know to be true, what would you tell your younger self if you could?
Well, no dope.
Oh, okay.
Dope is out. Because, and I know that a lot of people have issues with that, allowed themselves to, dope and alcohol. I woke up about that stuff pretty early on because I was starting to get into it with everybody else. And I remember a couple of heroin, experiences that I had. And I realized that wasn't going to end so well for me if I kept doing that. And so I thought about my dad. My dad just popped up in my head. And I thought, the thought was, what if my dad saw me like this? And that was so sobering that I walked away from all of that stuff. If you want to ruin your life creatively and socially, do those two things. If you're really interested in destruction, those are good ways to do it. Mm-hmm. But if you're interested in really finding what you are in your life, then stay as far away from those things as you possibly can. I mean, people drink wine or whatever social, drinking, but I'm talking about hardcore stuff where it becomes a part of the fabric of your life. I think that's destructive, and I saw it firsthand with all the guys here in Tower that I worked with. We have guys that are recovering alcoholics and drug addicts. Mm-hmm. I watched them. I watched how it went, and it was hurtful to be around it because they were my brothers, my family, and what they were doing to themselves. But thank God now everybody's cool, and we got our lives and we're rolling on. So it's great.
But that hurt that you experienced from being around that was so deep that it actually was the impetus for you to leave the band. Isn't that true?
That's correct. It's like it was like having a relationship with someone that never worked. There was a lot of love there, deep, but it didn't work for whatever reasons. And every time I go back, it was the same garbage over and over and over. And I couldn't hang with it. It was, I hated it because it was destroying what I knew we had,
And what you knew you had was something that was very incredibly special, and
yes,
and worth preserving,
yes.
and honoring. Yeah, yes. Mostly honoring and I could see how difficult that would be to be in a relationship like that. You know, it's hard enough being in a relationship with a single person, never mind being in an intimate relationship with a group of people.
As we close this,
Yes.
just that's a good thing to close with. There is that, when you're in a situation like this, you have a commitment to the music that you're going to play, because that's why you're there. But you also have a commitment to each other, to be your best for each other. So you want to be your best for the music, and you want to be your best for each other. We've had guys in the band who don't know how to be their best for each other, and they never stay. We have a bunch of guys who have a commitment to each other. And I think if you're going to have a band, which is, what it is, you're bound together. You have to honor each other. You have to be respectful. You have to communicate with each other. You have to love each other and, take care of each other. Just like you take care of the music, you take care of each other. And that's so important. I mean, if people want to know how to have a band, there it is.
That's well said. We've got about a minute and a half. What would you, can you tell people where they can find out more about you and your upcoming shows, your instructional DVDs?
TowerPower.com. TowerPower.com, and you see the schedule for the Million Gig March. You'll see it there. And as far as my materials, I don't have a personal website or anything, but all my stuff's out there. It's available on Amazon and other places, and I got another book project that I'm in the works, and so it just continues.
David, I actually find that really refreshing that in this world of self-promotion and social media and everything, you don't have a website. Good for you.
I know. I'm sort of like, I kind of like a under the radar. It's kind of weird. I have to surface to do this stuff, but then, as soon as it's out there, I go back into my little DG hole, my rabbit hole, and continue working and building,
Well, so far so good, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. And no complaints. It's working,
I really want to thank you for your time. It's been wonderful spending the hour with you. I'm
Terry, my pleasure, man. My
so
pleasure.
glad that you're back on your feet and back on the drum throne and living your life. Everybody go check out everything that Tower Power is doing, because this is a band that is worth following and knowing about if you don't already. And
come to its TOP show. It's pretty epic. You'll have fun.
Absolutely. I would agree. You will have fun. And on that note, thanks everybody for spending the hour with us, and we'll see you all next week.
Tune in again next week for another great episode of Making It with Terry Woman.